The busy bee at the gilded spoon. The clinking of silverware against fine china was a symphony Maria knew by heart. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long, golden fingers through the arched windows of the gilded spoon, Maria Elena Rodriguez transformed from a quiet girl from the barrio into a whirlwind of efficiency. Her movements were precise, a dance honed by countless hours of practice. She smoothed crisp white tablecloths, aligning each fold with obsessive care, ensuring every crystal goblet sparkled under the warm glow of the chandeliers. "Another water, table 7, a voice chirped, and Maria was already there, a delicate glass pitcher in hand, refilling without a spill. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a modest white apron, was a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Gilt-edged mirrors reflected the flickering candlelight, and velvet banquettes invited patrons to sink into their plush depths. The air itself seemed to hum with the murmur of polite conversation and the gentle tinkle of ice in expensive drinks. Maria, the busy bee, weaved through it all, a silent, attentive presence. Between serving a perfectly seared scallops dish and clearing a dessert plate, her gaze often drifted to the corner of the dining room. There, nestled against a wall adorned with an intricate tapestry, stood a grand piano. Its polished ebony surface gleamed, reflecting the subtle lights of the room like a dark, silent pool. It was always there, beautiful and untouched, a silent testament to a forgotten art. A pang of something bittersweet would flutter in Maria's chest each time she saw it. She remembered her abuela's calloused fingers dancing over the worn keys of their humble upright piano back home. The melodies abuela coaxed from it were the soundtrack of Maria's childhood, lively cumbias that made her feet tap, and soulful boleros that spoke of love and longing. Abuela had taught her to play, too, patiently guiding her small hands, encouraging her even when the notes were clumsy. "Music, Mija," Abuela would say, her eyes twinkling, "is the language of the soul. It needs no translation." Maria carried that sentiment within her, a secret melody in her heart. But here, at the Gilded Spoon, there was no place for such personal expressions. Here, she was a server, an invisible cog in a luxurious machine. Her role was to anticipate needs, to deliver flawless service, to ensure the wealthy clientele experienced nothing less than perfection. Her own dreams, her quiet passion for the piano, remained tucked away, like a cherished locket hidden beneath her uniform. A sudden chill permeated the room, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that Maria, ever observant, immediately noticed. The hushed conversations seemed to dim, and a collective intake of breath rippled through the dining area. Maria instinctively straightened her apron, her eyes scanning the entrance. And there she was. Mrs. Snobsworth. Her arrival was always an event, a grand entrance that commanded attention. Maria braced herself. The evening, it seemed, was about to become significantly more challenging. Mrs. Snobsworth's grand entrance. The double doors of the grand ballroom swung inward with a theatrical flourish, admitting a gust of cold air, and a figure draped in more velvet and diamonds than a queen's ransom. Mrs. Millicent Snobsworth III, a woman whose name alone seemed to demand an echo, swept into the room like a particularly flamboyant storm. Her laughter, a booming, brassy sound, preceded her, bouncing off the high ceilings and silencing the polite murmur of other patrons. A cascade of emeralds glittered at her throat, catching the chandelier light, and a substantial diamond ring winked on every finger. Her crimson silk gown, cinched impossibly tight, rustled with every imperious step. Maria, polishing a crystal water glass at a nearby station, felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. Mrs. Snobsworth was a regular, and her visits were less dining experiences, and more public performances of superiority. Today, her gaze, sharp as a hawk's, landed squarely on Maria. "Ah, the little one," Mrs. Snobsworth boomed, her voice carrying across the polished floor. "You're still here, then? Thought you might have found a better use for those nimble fingers by now." She gestured vaguely towards Maria's hands, which instinctively tightened around the glass. Maria's cheeks flushed, but she offered a soft, "Good evening, Mrs. Snobsworth. Welcome back." She moved towards the table Mrs. Snobsworth had already claimed, her steps quiet and efficient. "Don't hover, child," Mrs. Snobsworth snapped, dismissing her with a flick of a bejeweled wrist. "Just bring me the usual. And make sure the tea is boiling, not merely hot. I detest lukewarm infusions." She settled into her plush armchair, with a sigh that seemed to suggest the unbearable burden of her own existence. Maria nodded, her eyes downcast, and quickly retrieved the silver teapot and cup. As she poured, Mrs. Snobsworth scrutinized her with an air of mild disdain. "Your uniform looks starched." "Good. Nothing worse than a slovenly server. And try to smile, dear. It costs nothing, you know, and makes you seem less like a perpetually startled mouse." A flicker of something unreadable passed through Maria's eyes, quickly veiled. She set the teacup down with a steady hand, her movements precise. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Mrs. Snobsworth?" "For now, just silence," the woman declared, waving her away. "Go do whatever it is you do. Polish something, perhaps." From across the room, Barty Higgins, the maître d', watched the interaction unfold. A muscle in his jaw twitched almost imperceptibly, as he observed Mrs. Snobsworth's theatrics. His gaze lingered on Maria, a silent assessment of her composure. He'd seen her endure this many times, her quiet resilience a stark contrast to the boisterous arrogance of the hotel's most demanding guest. A subtle, disapproving frown creased his brow before he turned to greet a new arrival, his usual calm demeanor unwavering, but the tension in his shoulders betraying his true feelings. Maria, meanwhile, retreated to the service station, her heart thrumming a slightly faster rhythm against her ribs. The quiet instrument. Maria's soft, wordless melody mingled with the faint lemon polish, and the kitchen's lingering garlic, as her rag traced slow, methodical circles on the dark mahogany table. Her gaze, however, strayed beyond the gleaming wood to the grand piano dominating the far corner. It was a magnificent, sleek black creature, its highly polished surface mirroring the chandelier's gentle glow. An immaculate row of ivory and ebony keys seemed to beckon, promising melodies unheard. A quiet magnetism often drew Maria to it, even as she performed her duties. She'd observed countless patrons admire it, some even attempting clumsy, one-fingered scales. Yet, in her year here, no one had truly played it. It stood as a beautiful, silent centerpiece. A warm, comforting memory flickered. Maria, a small child perched precariously on an oversized stool, her feet dangling. Her abuela's gnarled, loving hands, fragrant with lavender and marsa, guided tiny fingers across yellowed keys. "Feel the music, Mija," Abuela would whisper, her voice a soft caress. "It is in your heart, waiting to be set free." Their modest living room's old upright, its keys sometimes sticky, had been Maria's gateway to another world. Abuela, with unending patience, taught her simple scales, then nursery rhymes, and eventually the beginnings of old Spanish folk songs. Those golden-lit afternoon moments remained among Maria's most cherished. A barely audible sigh escaped Maria. She yearned to feel the cool, smooth surface of those keys beneath her fingertips, to finally release the music within her. She imagined rich, resonant tones filling the elegant room, a stark contrast to the clatter of plates and hushed conversations. But the thought was quickly eclipsed by a familiar chill of apprehension. What if she erred? What if her playing proved inadequate for such a grand instrument, in such a sophisticated setting? The fear of judgment, of ridicule or presumption, was a heavy cloak she'd worn too long. She was Maria, the quiet, hard-working waitress, not a performer. The piano remained a beautiful, tantalizing secret, its silence echoing her own. With a final, lingering glance, she refocused on her polishing, the silent longing a familiar ache in her chest. The mocking challenge. The clatter of crystal on a silver tray usually meant another round of champagne for the endlessly demanding Mrs. Snobsworth. Maria had learned to anticipate the precise moment her imperious gaze would fix upon her, a silent summons that always brought a knot to her stomach. Today, however, was different. "You, little maid." The words, sharp as shards of ice, cut through the genteel murmur of the ballroom. Maria, balancing a precarious stack of empty flutes, flinched, nearly dropping them. Her cheeks flushed a mortifying crimson. All eyes, it seemed, swiveled towards her, drawn by Mrs. Snobsworth's booming voice. The matriarch, draped in an emerald gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, gestured grandly towards the polished grand piano in the corner. "Come here, girl. I have a challenge for you." A ripple of hushed anticipation, laced with thinly veiled amusement, spread through the assembled guests. Maria's breath hitched. She knew this tone, this particular gleam in Mrs. Snobsworth's eye. It was the look of a predator toying with its prey. Maria carefully set the tray on a nearby side table, her fingers trembling slightly. She walked towards Mrs. Snobsworth, acutely aware of the weight of every judging stare. Each step felt like a pilgrimage to an execution. "I hear you have aspirations," Mrs. Snobsworth purred, her smile a cruel twist of painted lips. Her gaze raked over Maria's simple uniform, lingering on the subtle tremble of her hands. "They say you fancy yourself a musician. Is that so?" A nervous swallow was Maria's only response. She could feel the heat rising in her face, the blood pounding in her ears. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Then came the laughter. A loud, boisterous cackle that seemed to shake the very foundations of the opulent room. Mrs. Snobsworth threw her head back, her diamond necklace glittering like 1,000 mocking eyes. Oh, the absurdity! A mere servant, entertaining notions of artistry. Her voice dripped with saccharine condescension. "Go on, then, little bird. Play us a tune. Show us your talent." She gestured again towards the piano, a theatrical flourish of her bejeweled hand. "Unless, of course, you're all talk and no aptitude." The taunt stung, each word a venomous arrow piercing Maria's fragile confidence. Her initial embarrassment threatened to overwhelm her, to send her fleeing from the room in a desperate attempt to escape the humiliation. Her gaze fell upon the gleaming keys of the piano, a silent, beautiful enigma. A sudden, unexpected spark ignited within her, a tiny ember of defiance against the crushing weight of Mrs. Snobsworth's disdain. She felt a flicker of resolve, a quiet rebellion against the woman's cruel amusement. Perhaps, just perhaps, she would meet this challenge. A brave step forward. Maria's hands, usually adept at balancing trays laden with steaming plates, now felt like lead weights. The insistent hum of conversation, once a comforting backdrop, had sharpened into 1,000 tiny needles pricking at her resolve. Mrs. Albright's sneering challenge echoed in her mind, amplified by the sudden, expectant hush that had fallen over the dining room. Every polished silver spoon, every flickering candle flame, seemed to point at her. This is it, she thought, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. Now or never. Her gaze flickered towards the gleaming grand piano, a black beast in the corner, its ivory keys beckoning and terrifying in equal measure. A lifetime of quiet practice in her small apartment, of stolen moments of joy, now felt utterly inadequate. The thought of all those eyes, dissecting her every move, her every tremor, was almost paralyzing. "Be brave," a small voice, surprisingly firm, whispered from deep within her. It was the voice of her abuela, of every ancestor, who had faced adversity with quiet dignity. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Maria pushed away from the service station. Her apron, usually a symbol of her competence, now felt like a target. Each step she took towards the piano was deliberate, almost agonizingly slow. The floorboards beneath her sensible work shoes seemed to amplify the sound, a rhythmic tap-tap-tap that echoed in the sudden silence. She could feel the collective gaze of the patrons, a tangible weight pressing down on her shoulders. Whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves, drifted around her, but their exact words were lost in the buzzing in her ears. A blush crept up her neck, hot and undeniable. She kept her eyes fixed on the distant piano, an anchor in a sea of judgment. Midway across the room, she risked a glance towards Mr. Higgins, who stood by the kitchen door, his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was unreadable, as always, but as their eyes met, he offered a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent affirmation, a flicker of support in the overwhelming darkness. It wasn't pity, but something far more valuable, quiet encouragement. The gesture, small as it was, sent a jolt of strength through Maria. It wasn't just her facing this, Barty, in his own way, was standing with her. She reached the piano, the polish wood cool beneath her fingertips. The keys, a stark contrast of ebony and ivory, gleamed under the soft light. A tremor ran through her, but she forced herself to sit, her back straight, her shoulders squared. The bench was surprisingly comfortable, and for a fleeting moment, she felt a strange sense of belonging. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. The entire restaurant held its breath, waiting. The air was thick with anticipation, a heavy blanket draped over every table. Maria closed her eyes, seeking solace in the silence before the storm. The melody of memory. Maria's breath hitched, a faint tremor running through her, as she settled onto the piano bench. The polished ivory of the keys seemed to gleam mockingly under the soft glow of the chandelier. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her to flee. But she wouldn't. Not now. Not after everything. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, picturing Abuela's gentle smile, her gnarled fingers guiding Maria's own across the very same notes, years ago. With a silent prayer, Maria opened her eyes and let her fingers drift, featherlight, to the keys. She took one last, deep breath, drawing in the scent of aged wood and the faintest hint of garlic from the kitchen. Then, she pressed down. The first notes unfurled into the hushed dining room, clear and resonant, a simple arpeggio that seemed to shimmer in the air. It wasn't loud or boisterous, instead, it was a delicate sigh, a whisper that commanded attention. The chattering of diners, which moments before had been a low hum, began to recede, replaced by a growing silence. Maria's initial trepidation slowly melted away, replaced by a familiar warmth, the comforting embrace of music. She launched into a melody Abuela had taught her, a forgotten folk song from their village, rich with longing and quiet joy. The notes flowed effortlessly, a seamless stream of sound. Her fingers danced across the keys with an unexpected grace, coaxing out harmonies that wove through the room like a fragrant vine. Each chord was imbued with a tenderness, a depth of feeling that belied her shy demeanor. A hush had fallen over the gilded spoon, so profound that the clink of silverware from a distant table sounded shockingly loud. Waiters froze mid-step, their trays momentarily forgotten. Mrs. Snobsworth, who had been observing with a self-satisfied smirk, her posture radiating an air of triumphant malice, felt her jaw slacken. The corner of her mouth, usually curled in disdain, drooped in genuine astonishment. She had expected clumsy plunking, an amateur's fumbling attempt at best, confirmation of her preconceived notions. Instead, the music that filled the room was exquisite. Her eyes, initially narrowed in condescension, widened imperceptibly. The lilting melody, infused with a soulful quality, seemed to bypass her carefully constructed walls of cynicism. It wasn't the kind of showy, technical display she associated with proper classical music, but something far more profound, something that resonated with an almost primal beauty. The intricate flourishes and the emotional swells spoke of a talent she had not only dismissed but actively scorned. The smirk vanished completely, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated surprise. Maria, lost in the ebb and flow of the song, didn't notice. She simply played, pouring her heart into every note, a melody of memory echoing through the elegant dining room. Silence and applause. The last lingering notes of the melody hung in the air, a shimmering veil of sound that had captivated every soul in The Gilded Spoon. Forks, once poised over glistening scallops, lay forgotten on pristine white linen. Chatter, a constant hum moments before, had completely evaporated, replaced by the gentle sniffles of several patrons. A tear tracked a path down the rouged cheek of a woman near the window, her gaze fixed on Maria Elena, who remained lost in the music, her fingers dancing across the keys. Even Mrs. Snobsworth, whose usual expression was one of perpetual disdain, seemed momentarily subdued, a strange, almost wistful look in her eyes. Barty, leaning against the bar, watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. He saw the raw emotion, the undeniable power of the music washing over his usually jaded clientele. Maria Elena, lost in the intricate tapestry of the piece, felt the emotion swell within her, a pure, unadulterated joy that transcended the fear and humiliation of moments before. Her fingers found the final, resonant chord, a perfect, aching resolution that seemed to echo in the very marrow of the listener's bones. Then, nothing. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the restaurant, a hush so complete that the distant clatter of a plate in the kitchen sounded like a gunshot. It wasn't the silence of discomfort, but of awe, of a collective breath held. Every eye was on Maria Elena, who slowly, almost reluctantly, lifted her hands from the ivory keys, her chest rising and falling with a soft sigh. Her cheeks were flushed, a mixture of adrenaline and the profound release of sharing such a deeply personal part of herself. The silence stretched, thick and potent, for what felt like an eternity. Maria Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, the old anxieties beginning to creep back in. Had it been too much? Had she overstepped? She glanced nervously at Mrs. Snobsworth, expecting the familiar sneer, the cutting remark. Instead, a lone clap echoed through the room. Then another. And another. Suddenly, the entire restaurant erupted. Chairs scraped back as guests rose to their feet, a thunderous wave of applause washing over Maria Elena. Waiters, cooks, even the usually stoic Barty, joined in, their faces alight with admiration. Mrs. Snobsworth, to everyone's astonishment, was among the first to rise, her applause surprisingly vigorous, a faint flush on her own cheeks. Maria Elena, overwhelmed, felt a hot rush of tears welling in her own eyes. The applause wasn't just for a performance, it was for her, for the raw, honest beauty she had shared, for the undeniable talent that had, for a fleeting moment, united everyone in the room. A change of heart, or just surprise? The final chord hung in the air, a shimmering echo of melancholy and triumph. Maria's fingers remained poised above the keys for a breath, then slowly, almost reverently, lifted away. A profound silence descended upon the grand hall, thick and heavy, broken only by the distant clink of cutlery from the main dining room. Every eye in the private chamber was fixed on Maria, but Maria's own gaze, defying her usual timid nature, drifted towards Mrs. Snobsworth. Mrs. Millicent Snobsworth III, for once in her impeccably tailored life, was utterly speechless. Her usually pursed lips were parted slightly, revealing a flash of perfectly white teeth. Her eyes, typically narrowed in disdain or boredom, were wide, impossibly wide, reflecting the ornate chandelier above them like twin polished marbles. The vibrant rose hue of her cheeks, usually a permanent fixture of her indignation, had drained away, leaving a pale, almost ashen complexion. The diamond pendant at her throat, which usually rose and fell with her indignant pronouncements, lay still. She wasn't merely surprised, she looked as if she'd been struck by lightning, leaving her frozen in a tableau of pure, unadulterated shock. A small, almost imperceptible smile bloomed on Maria's face. It wasn't a triumphant smirk, nor was it a defiant grin. It was a smile of quiet pride, a gentle affirmation of her own hidden strength. The fear that had tightened her chest just moments before had evaporated, replaced by a warm current of satisfaction. She had faced the challenge, overcome her self-doubt, and poured her very soul into the music. And in Mrs. Snobsworth's stunned silence, she found her vindication. Mr. Bartholomew Higgins, who had watched the entire spectacle unfold with a professional impassivity that belied his inner turmoil, now began to move. His footsteps were soft on the plush carpet, a stark contrast to the earlier cacophony. He approached Maria, a warm, approving smile gracing his usually reserved features. It was a smile that spoke volumes, conveying not just congratulations, but a deeper understanding and respect. He didn't need to say a word, his eyes, crinkling at the corners, communicated everything. Maria met his gaze, her smile widening slightly. The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a lingering aura of wonder. The other guests, who had likewise been rendered mute by the unexpected performance, started to stir, murmuring among themselves. But Mrs. Snobsworth remained rooted to her spot, her expression still etched with an unbelievable, almost vulnerable, bewilderment. The carefully constructed facade of the imperious socialite had cracked, revealing a fleeting glimpse of something raw and deeply human beneath. The air, heavy moments before with expectation and judgment, now shimmered with an entirely new, unsettling possibility. Maria's new song. A warmth bloomed in Maria's chest, unfamiliar yet comforting, like the first rays of dawn after a long night. It wasn't the fleeting flush of embarrassment, nor the nervous flutter of anticipation, but something deeper, more resonant. A quiet pride. She thought of the melody that had spilled from her fingers just moments ago, raw and unpracticed, yet undeniably hers. It had been a language only she could speak, a story only she could tell. The realization settled within her, this talent, this gift, it was a part of her, indelible and precious. No sneer, no condescending remark, no amount of money could ever diminish its worth. It was hers, and that was enough. In her mind's eye, Abuela's photo appeared, framed in the familiar, slightly chipped silver. Maria met the imagined gaze, a twinkle of understanding passing between them. See, Abuela. She thought, a silent conversation across time and memory. I remembered your song. I made it my own. A faint smile touched her lips, a genuine curve that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. The clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation in the dining room no longer felt like an oppressive weight. Instead, it was a backdrop, a rhythm against which her new internal melody played. She moved through the tables, clearing forgotten water glasses, and wiping down spills with a newfound grace. Her steps, usually a hurried shuffle, now possessed a lightness, almost a bounce. She felt taller, her shoulders less hunched. When she caught her reflection in the polished surface of a passing tray, she saw a different Maria, a glint of defiance in her usually downcast eyes, a subtle lift to her chin. Maria, that was truly something special, Mrs. Albright, her usual table by the window, called out, her voice softer than Maria had ever heard it. Mrs. Albright, known for her sharp observations and even sharper tongue, offered a rare, genuine smile. I've never heard anything quite like it. Maria offered a shy but confident nod, a small thank you, escaping her lips. It wasn't the practiced politeness of a server, but a heartfelt acknowledgement. Later, as she refilled Mr. Henderson's coffee, he leaned in conspiratorially. My dear, you have a gift. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. His words, gentle and earnest, were another brushstroke on the canvas of her budding confidence. Mr. Higgins, observing from the entrance to the kitchen, watched Maria. His usual stoic expression softened almost imperceptibly. He saw the subtle shift in her posture, the way her smile now reached her eyes, no longer just a courtesy. He had known, of course, that she possessed a quiet strength, but to see it bloom so vibrantly, so suddenly, was a testament to the power of a moment, a melody. He cleared his throat, a low rumble that cut through the restaurant's hum. Maria glanced over, and he offered a discreet, approving nod. It was all that was needed. The unspoken message hung in the air, well done, Maria. Well done indeed. The air in the restaurant felt different, charged with a subtle shift, an undercurrent of appreciation that had been missing before. Maria, for the first time, felt truly seen, truly heard. And it felt like a new song had just begun.